Okay, so welcome to today's Tech Hour. Today is Thursday, the 8th of September, and the title is Published with Jekyll and LaTeX Compared. And for the people who are watching online, I'll just give a summary of what I said I'd do. So this Tech Hour is about publishing, and it compares the process with LaTeX for PDF with Jekyll for HTML. And I'm going to cover, amongst other things, installation, authoring, and publication. And it's all about the Tech Hour website, and that's what's prompted me to do it. And I'll compare that with my much longer experience of using the archive as an author. And hopefully I'll compare the TechLive installation and the Jekyll installation. Now, the first thing I'm going to do, which I'm going to go straight into after we've done this introduction, is a live demonstration from scratch via DistroBox, of how to install the tools, download the sources, build and edit and publish the website on your own Linux PC. And it's close to the process I actually followed, although I'll miss all the blind alleys. I don't think they're that interesting. So now let's see if we can share screen. Just a moment. Entire screen. Allow. Admit. Why won't this go away? Okay, so I think somebody's got their microphone on. You should be seeing my screen now.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So, are the fonts large enough?
Yeah, they're good.
Okay.
Great.
So the first thing I'm going to do is create somewhere to do my work. So I'll create a new directory. And why don't I just call it TH for Tech Hour demo. Now, I'm running Fedora because that's what I decided to put on my new PC, but I'm more familiar with Ubuntu. And I don't want to mess up any of the stuff I've already got installed. So I'm going to use DistroBox. And I'm going to use DistroBox create. And this is a bit like creating a whole new machine. So the name is going to be TH demo. And the home is going to be TH demo. We'll see what the home does in a moment. And the image, well, I can't remember the name of the image, but if I do DistroBox list in the bottom of the screen, here's an image, if image is the correct name. So we'll copy that and we'll paste that and we'll see if that works. So this will, roughly speaking, create a new virtual machine that uses Ubuntu 22.04. And we'll put a time in front so we know how long it takes. And it'll probably take 1 second because I've made a mistake. Well, that was that. Invalid flag name.
Jonathan, the font is just a bit small only in the terminals on the left. Otherwise, in the other boxes, yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you. We try to keep everybody happy. Container. Sorry, invalid container path.
Must be an absolute path.
Ah, yeah, it's here. Well, I am following the process I followed more closely than I thought. Invalid. The name is Okay, so this is what happens when people are watching it. Well, that didn't take long. However, all it's done is it's taken a lazy approach. So we'll follow the hint and we'll enter Tech Hour demo. Sorry, copy, paste. Okay. So now it's taking a little bit. This will take a minute or two, so I'll explain what's going on and you can interrupt me if you wish. So it's downloading an image from Docker Hub, I expect, and mostly the time spent is downloading the stuff, and then it's doing a sort of partial install. It's installing the stuff that's not already provided. If I wanted to take a shortcut, I could clone an existing distro box that I've created.
So this really is some sort of virtual machine.
It is a virtual machine. It's not a QEMU virtual machine. So it's a virtual machine, but it's what's called a kernel virtual machine because the Fedora and the Ubuntu are using the same kernel, which they can do because the kernels are so similar. I'm also using the same init. Init is the process 0 that controls all the resources. Let me just exit that and we can enter it again. And this is what happens when the distro box is already created and running. You see, that's really quick. Now, if we ls, we're actually in my home directory, pwd. But if we cd, that will take us to the home directory. And now if we ls, if we do pwd now, we're seeing that we've changed our home directory. And this home directory is lovely and empty, which gives me an isolation. And it's not quite empty. It's got the stuff that the bash shell needs. So now I'm going to go over to the Jekyll quick start. And Jekyll it's a bit like LaTeX, but for websites. And it's something that GitHub uses. It allows you to create and publish a website without even having a computer. All you need is access to a web browser somewhere, but you don't need to install anything on your software. It's completely a cloud thing if you want it to. And GitHub has Jekyll installed and runs it as a service every time pages that should be processed are changed. Now, very important thing here, requirements. I managed to skip that the first time, so we'll go over to that. Come on, come on, come on. Shall I make that a little bit bigger? Yeah. How about that? Okay, so we're on Ubuntu, and it tells us to do a command. I'll just copy that command. and we'll run it. And it'll take a minute or so, but we'll continue. This is a bit wasteful because I'm making a copy of something I've already done, and that's where cloning comes in. But I promised you, we've got 18 seconds left, so it's not going to be too bad. Okay, now they ask us to, I know what this stuff is, so I trust it. So now we should be set up and we should have a program called Gem. There it is. And then install Jekyll and Bundler. This will take a little while because it needs a lot of stuff. And building native extensions. While that's going on, I'll go over to GitHub and code. Somewhere it should explain where all the files are. Cancel. Release it. Here we go. So this is 2 days ago. This is the stuff I published. They're still building native extensions. So let's just look at the home page. So this is written in Markdown, and you get this sort of garbled thing because this thing here is a bit of Jekyll stuff that says, put a link here to this object. So you can think of this as a bit like a LaTeX macro. And again, this is last week's Tech Hour. Here, this is a link to last week's Tech Hour, and it's a bit like a LaTeX macro, and this is a link to the About page. Now, GitHub allows you to view take a raw view of the page. Come on. View raw, edit file. I don't understand why. Okay, here's a raw view of the file. So this is what you actually see in the editor. And if you're familiar with Markdown, you'll know your way around it. And this, for example, is a clever way of putting in the URL so that you're told if you've mistyped something. We've now got Bundler and stuff installed, so we can go back to the quick start. Sorry, we've done the installation on, we've installed everything, we hope. We certainly followed the instructions. So now let's go to the quick start. And let's just follow the instructions because we're all new to this. So we'll follow this instruction here. And we'll do this. And we'll see what happens. We get an error. I got an error last time. Cannot find file WebRick. Now, I think what I want to do here is gem install WebRick. Oh yes, it says so here. If you're using 3.0 or higher, you may have to bundle add WebRick. So let's also do bundle add WebRick. Now we'll do this, and we've still got an error. This is what happens when you do. What it's saying is that socket's already in use, and I don't know where it is in use. So I think what I need is the port command. I'm going to use port 4000 4010. Oh, there we go. So let's copy this link and add it to our tabs. So now we're in business. Except there's a feature I want to add to the command line. So if we do this, we'll be told what the options are. And there's something called live reload, which is really useful, and we'll see what that does. What it means is that as you type, what you get changes. So now we go into this middle window where I've got an editor open, and you'll notice that I've got a different home in the editor. I've just gone to the home directory, and it's a different home directory. So this is all a bit like when you SSH into a website, into another machine. You've got two shells going on, two terminals, one onto the one machine and one onto the other machine. And you can get confused as to which one is which. So this is pretty much the same as that, except the two terminals are actually on the same machine and going to the same file system, which is one of the things that DistroBox deliberately provides. So if we go here, and our folder was I thought it was Tech Hour. No. I'm going to exit and come back again. Yeah, it's TH demo. I know what's happened. Just ignore what I've said. We're going to enter this and do that again. Oh, CD. CD. Oh, here we go. We are where we want to be, I think. my blog. Okay, so we are where we want to be. Okay, I'm going to start a new editor to solve this problem. So this is where we want to be. Here's our blog. Here's my index file. Sorry. Now, do you see what's happened? There's quite a lot going on all at once here. So when I save this file, which is going to happen now, something is going to happen at the top left and in the top right. So what happened was we regenerated the file and we added the content here. So this is the live reload that we get. So I think I can tick a box. Perhaps I'll stop sharing and allow for some discussion, and then I can resume sharing. So, sorry. We're going through all sorts of things at high speed. There we go. So I'm going to stop the sharing and go to full screen. And there's something in the chat. Oh, that's sad. There was a big drama in this country because the Queen was unwell, and Philip has told us that her death has now been announced. It obviously means more to the people who live in this country than other people, but it's a very significant event. So I've done the demonstration of what happened, of what I did. And perhaps I'll pause the recording.
This meeting is being recorded.
So I'm not quite sure where to go from here. I've demoed the installation process and some of the features of Jekyll. And I've also demoed DistroBox, which is something that I think both Nelson and I are quite keen about. And it was actually only by creating a new DistroBox to avoid problems I was having with installation on the usual way was I able to sort of proceed with confidence and without landing myself into a mess on a installation that I didn't want to damage. Whereas the stuff that I showed you, I could throw it away. It hasn't affected my main distribution at all. And I think that's marvelous. And you saw how long it took. The whole process was quite quick. Now, I'm going to give us a lead into the comparison with the archive, which is this. When I was developing the TechLive website, I took an existing theme and customized it a little bit and added my content and wrote some macros, so to speak. I did the sort of usual LaTeX-y things that you would do when you're writing an article. But here I'm writing a website, and I proofed everything on my own machine. Now we're ready for the comparison with the archive. I do exactly the same thing when I submit an article to the archive. I don't submit a tech file and hope. I write the tech file and I develop the tech file. And then I go through the form that submits it to the archive. When I say submit, it's an HTML submit. It's not a journal like the Annals of Mathematics submit. And if that fully automated process is satisfactory to both sides, then it's scheduled for publication on the archive the next day. So there's a process there that's fully automatic, except there's a review process to weed out the things that are obviously from a crackpot or something. And in both cases, both on GitHub and on the archive, there's a reliance on being able to do the same calculation, namely rendering a website or creating a PDF, in two different places at two different times and get the same result. And this allows me to typeset the thing on my machine and then submit it through a web form to the archive, fully expecting that the archive will typeset it the same. And I have that same expectation when I send the stuff to GitHub to be published, because the HTML that GitHub serves from the TechHour domain or subdomain is the HTML it created. I don't send any HTML to GitHub. All I do is send the source files to GitHub and it processes them. So there's actually a similarity between the two processes. And the thing I'm sort of focused on, just in this minute or few minutes, is a reliance on being able to do the same thing on GitHub / archive as I do on my own machine. And that requires TechLive for the archive and distributions such as Ubuntu for Jekyll and GitHub. What would you like to see next or say next, or questions or anything else like that? I think there's too many things to talk about, and I want some suggestions if there are any.
I have a question.
Excellent.
Suppose you would like, as I would, to install a website that has many diagrams on it, into the hundreds. Does that have any, how does Jekyll deal with that, if at all?
What format are the diagrams in?
Well, at the moment, there are enough, there's a small number of HTML files with lots and lots of diagrams in each one of them. But
so the diagrams might be JPEGs or something like that, image files. Well, it doesn't matter.
No, there's a variety of formats.
Okay. Well, let's Jekyll has the sort of include graphics command. So you say, this is the graphic that I want to include, and you have to make sure that the graphic is where you want it. So essentially on your own machine, you build the site so it works, and you use some simple markdown commands similar to the use graphics command in LaTeX, and they will put the graphic into the web page, into the website. There's something worth saying, I think well worth saying, is that if you use a system such as Jekyll and you do it on GitHub, the first time the graphics are used, they have to be uploaded to GitHub. But subsequently, they don't need to be uploaded at all because they're already there. And the Git system takes care of all of that for you. So only the changes you make are sent up to GitHub because those are the only ones that are needed to be communicated. So you could create a folder with all your graphics, and it might be 20 megabytes, and you could push that to GitHub, and then they're all there in GitHub. And the subsequent uploads to GitHub will go very quickly because they're just text files. Does that help you at all, Dwight?
Yes, it may very well. I'm sorry about the phone ringing when
That's all right.
you were speaking here. It may be a start. I have the problem that I distribute some things on GitLab right now, and there was an announcement saying that starting next year, if you haven't made any changes to your distribution for a year, then they will delete it. Whereas,
If you're on the free plan.
yes, that's right. Otherwise, you have to keep paying, but I'm looking for what would be called a permanent archive. And I'm not sure that's the first problem. The second problem has to do with, well, revising these websites that I have that have a lot of graphics on them. And I'm looking for possibilities, really, rather than, that is to say, I don't really know what my choices are going to be. So that's why I'm interested in what's going on here. Putting things, first of all, on GitHub, but secondly, incorporating graphics, because I've got a bunch of graphics examples that people click on. And I mean, it's a very simple problem, but that's what it is at the moment.
Well, if you're already on GitLab, then you know how to use things you know how to use Git.
Well, at the moment, I don't put these example web pages containing graphics on GitLab.
No, but you know how to use Git. That's one obstacle that doesn't exist.
I'm certainly not an expert on it.
No, you don't. You probably don't have to be. You could just do an experiment and throw it away. The only danger of doing an experiment is that once you put something up on Git, somebody can clone it. And it's like when you publish something, you can't unpublish it, particularly with the internet. But
yes, those are the...
Other than that, you can just do an experiment. The other thing that goes through my mind is that I think there's probably quite a few people that are in the same situation of coming from the LaTeX tradition and coming from the scientific STEM sort of background, wanting to do more than simple web pages. And in a sense, missing some of the good things that you do have with LaTeX. And because the tech hour is the only medium I really spend a lot of time on, if you like, it might be good to have a tech hour devoted to that topic. Would you be interested in that, Dwight?
Well, I'm not sure that whether I can say anything sensible. Certainly, I'm interested in the problem. I have a couple of very simple problems that I'm trying to solve, at least for the future, or at least I'm trying to work up to solve them. And right. I need some direction there rather than telling people, other people, how to do things. The graphics files that I'm talking about are where I am indeed telling people how to do certain things, which is draw electric circuits using LaTeX compatible software.
Nelson here, could I maybe interject at
Please.
this point? I have to leave shortly for a meeting. Jonathan and I have been playing for the last couple of months with DistroBox, and there's some features of it that really haven't come out in this presentation that I think worth noting. One is that it really is extremely fast. The overhead of sitting in your native operating system and running a command inside a program inside the DistroBox operating systems is small. It's a quarter of a second or less. That's roughly the blink of an eye. In other words, whether you run the command natively on your machine or on one of the guest operating systems makes very little difference. Importantly, once DistroBox itself is installed as a package, which does require administrative privileges or root access on your system, the installation of other operating systems that are guests requires no special privileges. Anybody with an account in your system could install such things. And that, I think, has tremendous amount of value. If you do a man command on DistroBox, you discover that it has of the order of 40 or so different operating system bundles that you can choose from and install. So if you want to play with different Linux distros, you certainly can that way at very low cost. And it takes only 10 to 20 seconds to install the new one. So it's a very fast experimentation system. But for long-term document management, it's important to be able to have the same typesetting environment so that things aren't changing from underneath you and breaking things. And consequently, a tech installation inside any particular DistroBox bundle that you've installed can remain frozen, and you can expect to use it for many years in the future, possibly even for decades. I think the indication is that once computers are implemented in software, they can be made to run forever. We're routinely running computers built in the 1950s and 60s, not in physical hardware, but in software, and they work just fine. And they work a lot faster than they used to. So the ability for unprivileged users to play with this, the speed at which the playing can happen, as Jonathan demonstrated, the ease of uploading stuff to a website, are really all strongly in favor of learning more about this technology and trying to figure out how can it benefit things that you do. So that's the comments I had about it.
I've got a couple of things I wanted to say regarding Dwight's contribution. He wants to sort. There are two things you said that were conflated. The one is having hosting, and the other is having an archive, and they're sort of different things. So the Git essentially provides an archival system, and as long as somebody's got the Git files, has got the Git repository, they've got everything they need. But then the hosting might be variable. Now, I today had a surprising experience, which is that I was reading an article on the Journal of Integer Sequences, and it gave me a link to the online encyclopedia of the integer sequences, and the link was broken. Now, the link was in a PDF file. So the way things stand, you actually have to recompile the PDF with LaTeX in order to update the link. I also found that resources that were linked to on the online encyclopedia of integer sequences, there were slides of a talk. They were linked to a university website from about 15 years ago. And what's happened is that universities have been much more security conscious and much more restrictive about people putting their own stuff up on our domain. And in a certain extent, for good reason. So making sure that things persist, which is one of the primary benefits and functions of print for a long time, is really important. Until print, there was great uncertainty as to what the laws of England were, because they were written down on parchment and copied on parchment. Whereas with print, you get multiple copies, and so the laws of England can be disseminated. And print, in some sense, was the ground for the rise of the legal profession, because it gave them a shared experience. So the disappearance of things is a problem, whether it's PDF or HTML. And the Beamer slides that I wanted to look at that disappeared is a PDF problem, but it's still a web disappearance problem. So that's one of the sort of traditions of tech and LaTeX that our community expects of and can bring to communities such as Jekyll. Peace-Cop Kelmer says, can we use LaTeX with Jekyll? You can use MathJax with Jekyll for the mathematics. I did a little bit of research on that, and I don't know what, so to speak, the state of the art is on that and what best practice is. But certainly MathJax you can use with Jekyll. Does that answer your question, Peace-Cop?
Yes, I have used MathJax for a while for Bookdown, and MathJax is quite limited. I can't use some chemistry packages or some other special packages that MathJax doesn't include.
I would say the answer to that would be to output the diagram, output this, typeset the stuff on your machine and output it as SVG. There's other possibilities. SVG is the most straightforward one. And then you get outline fonts, which is what MathJax provides. You get many of the benefits of MathJax, not necessarily all of them. And that is one recommendation for getting the stuff in. So do it as graphics, but as scalable vector graphics rather than bitmap graphics. A long time ago, there was a book published called The LaTeX Web Companion. And it might be worth revisiting that if you can find a copy. I notice Kaveh is wisely shaking his hand. Do you know what the state of art is regarding LaTeX Web Companion and that sort of stuff, Kaveh?
No, it's a long time since I used it, but it's the first time I've heard it for years, so that's why I was nodding.
Well, I'm sure that the needs that it addressed are still needs, and we should perhaps look at that. I'm thinking that some sort of session on sort of workshop problem desk on web publishing of small STEM websites.
May I
Might be useful. Shamsi.
may I add another item for a possible future agenda?
Oh yeah.
So this is very much from the perspective of the archive. I work at the archive, and many of the topics that came up today are really relevant to our current efforts. What we are looking at is what role archive can play in making research papers accessible. Most research submitted to archive is in LaTeX format, so anything related to tech is relevant to us. But the picture that's building in our heads that we've heard from our community is providing well-formatted HTML would be the most impactful step that we could take. So that's kind of the direction that we're looking at. And we've separated out questions such as how to do charts and graphs and how to do math as their own challenge. And the fundamental shift is going to be to HTML. And I'm not quite sure how to phrase that as a topic, but I would be very interested in hearing people's thoughts on that shift, that there's a lot of, it will call for a lot of collaboration, and it will call for a shift, a little bit of a shift in culture and perhaps some training and guidance for the authors who are producing these very complex documents. A lot becomes involved when we take that on as a challenge, but I would love to talk about that and have a discussion about that.
Can I just say, yeah, I'm also very interested in that, Shamsi. Can I ask you a question, please, Shamsi? What about this? You've got archive with an X, and then you've got R5, right? AR digit 5 IV, which is the, from what I understand, is the HTML equivalent. They're trying to convert as many of these papers into HTML. What is the status of that, and what's the quality of that HTML?
Yeah, I can give you an update. We are in direct conversations with the R5 group. It's really two people, Dayan Ganev and Bruce Miller from NIST, and their project is called LaTeX ML. R5 is kind of a tag, a clever tag that they gave it, because their goal is, their practical application of LaTeX ML is to convert the PDFs or the tech on archive into HTML. So that's the clever tag, but it is actually a project that Dayan and Bruce are working on and have been working on for over a decade. And the latest number I heard is 72%. Though there is a gray area above that of papers that may very well be high quality, but something is flagged. It might be something really low priority, or it might be something really high priority. They're not right now able to tell the difference. So the 72% is papers that have no flags at all.
Okay, and is that access? And what is the accessibility of that, do you think?
There's still work to be done. The success rate as they are measuring it is that the tech was converted into reasonably formatted HTML.
Yeah.
And they care about accessibility, but that's not their number one goal. So that would be an additional assessment on top of the work that they're doing now.
Correct. Thank you for that. Thank you. Yeah, ideal goal. Forgive me if I'm continuing this, but we talked a lot about accessibility last time and one time before. Ideally, if you have a really good solution, what would be nice to have? It would be nice to have accessible HTML, but it's a bigger challenge. At the same time, have accessible PDFs too. That would be wonderful to have as a sort of second. It'd be nice to have that in mind. So that would be that's in my head. That's something I'm sort of working on, and it would be good to have.
I actually have to run to my next meeting, but it was great seeing folks again, and thank you, Jonathan, for hosting.
You're very welcome, and thank you for your suggestion that there be some event where the concerns of the archive are put at the front, and I'm willing to put effort into that.
We
But
love
I think
that
the
idea.
archive actually has to take a lead and, if not build a community or lead a community, contribute to that process.
Yeah,
And
we're
I think
definitely
that's what
committed
you're
to a
already doing.
contribution. Yeah. All right, goodbye, everybody.
Bye, Shamsi. Now, has anybody who hasn't spoken wanting to speak?
Well, I've spoken, but just a quick question. How common is this Jekyll?
Sorry?
How common is Jekyll?
I think it's quite widely used. I was speaking to a friend who works as, roughly speaking, a sysadmin, explaining what I was doing, and he told me after I said that I was using Jekyll, yes, that's what I would have recommended, and that's what I think I've used for something else. It's written in Ruby, which is not my favorite language. Well, I don't know it, so I'm biased against it, aren't I? But It seems to have got some very good design points to it. And it seems to have been widely adopted in the Ruby community as the static site generator. What we're talking about is static site generators, which is the closest thing to compiling a LaTeX document to a PDF in the HTML world. And I would say it's probably the preferred static site generator in the Ruby community, which gives it a lot of leverage. And GitHub was built using Ruby. So it's quite natural that they should use Jekyll. So if somebody wanted to sort of produce and host a geeky-like website, I would probably suggest use GitHub Pages or an equivalent if there is one, and use whatever the default process is for that. One of the great things about this is that somebody can read your website, see that there's a typo or information that needs to be added, click an on button, fork the project, edit their own copy of the source of the page that is at fault, make the change, submit a pull request, and then all you have to do is review the pull request, click the button to accept it. It gets merged into the repository, and in the fullness of time, which means a minute, the site is regenerated and it's available for everybody. So that is a considerable reduction to the barrier of entry and the making of corrections and so forth. And that is part of the, so to speak, the architectural thing, the user experience thing that I think Ruby is very good at. And
So in some, sorry.
I just want to say the installation instructions are, in some which I went through, a manifestation of the experience that's going on. Something that you didn't see was that my project has a gem file, which is essentially a manifest of all the things it needs. And Ruby, Jekyll, ensures that you don't use anything that's not in the gem file. So to reproduce the environment, you have to supply the gem file and nothing else. Which is, I think, very powerful. Back to you for that.
Yeah, so in some very general sense, it's rather than writing HTML directly, it's sort of like editing a Wikipedia page or something with their own macros for links and so on.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. It's a markup language, but being geeks, they call it markdown rather than markup. And it's designed for a different purpose, which is simple web pages rather than careful and exact technical documentation. There's another system called Hugo, which I've used for my own personal website, and it has many architectural similarities to Jekyll, partly through imitation and partly through being subject to the same horses. You know, a zebra ends up looking like a horse because they're both grassy plains animals. So there's a lot to learn from there that perhaps could even be learned and brought back into the LaTeX environment. The way in which, you know, if you redesigned LaTeX on the basis of the experience of Jekyll, you'd end up with a different sort of LaTeX in a number of areas. And I think that's interesting. Jekyll is much more rigorous about the separation between the preamble and the document, whereas LaTeX is very flexible about where these things happen. And I think that can cause problems. I'm going to stop. Any more questions? Any more contributions? We've gone over time a little bit, but we did stop for a few minutes.
Yeah, well, at Archive, we're using